Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWireTV interview. I'm joined today by John Donovan, the Managing Director ANZ at Sophos, who is here to talk about the 2022 Sophos Threat Report. Welcome to the program.
Alex, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you, obviously.
An absolute pleasure to have you here. Now, John, before we get into the report, can you please recap 2021 at Sophos for us and what the big developments this year have been?
Yikes. Well, I guess, look, 2021 has been pretty extraordinary again. We thought we'd got through everything at the end of 2020.
We did.
And then it all happened again. The story I like to share with people is, back in March last year when COVID first started hitting, my boss said to me, so what do you think the impact is going to be? And like most people, I had a fairly conservative view, and I thought, gosh, we're going to see a X% decline in the business. And then, of course, at the end of the 12 months, like most IT companies, especially in the security space, we had a tremendous amount of growth. So, a fantastic result, but obviously terrible forecasting. So I need to get better at that. Very, very similar this year as well. Obviously, it's been very challenging for all of us with lockdowns and shutdowns and workforce redeployments and all that sort of stuff. Personally, or from a Sophos perspective, we've shut down offices all over the world and opened them back up and again on a far too regular basis. But that has actually given us a fair amount of empathy for our customer base as well, who've been going through the same thing. So we've had to deal with the same sort of issues, which is take a fairly significant workforce, pick them up out of an office where you have a fairly standard, secure network, and plunk them down somewhere else, whether it's work from home or work from a remote location. We've had to deal with those same sort of challenging security issues. So from that perspective, we've faced the same sort of challenges as our customers have. We've dealt with the same sort of impacts on the business with the fluidity. But I think one of the great things that's come out of it, and there is always a silver lining to everything, is it's just shown us how flexible the workforce can be. And it's allowed us to remodel the company to a certain extent, where we have a much more hybrid nature of workforce deployment, which has really been beneficial for just mental health of the people that work for us as well. And I'm sure that customers are saying the same thing. No one really likes sitting in a bus or a taxi or a car or a ferry or any of those things or a train to commute for an hour or two every day to go into an office and then jump on the same thing at the end of the day and go back home. We found very effectively that our own employees are able to do their jobs remotely just as well, frankly, if not better, remotely. So there's been some great stuff that's come out of it.
Yeah, well, it also highlights the resiliency of humanity, the human spirit. I mean, we have challenges. This is just the latest one in millennia of different challenges humanity has faced. And, sadly, of course, there's been millions of deaths, but humanity has also moved forward. We take hybrid working for granted. I mean, I know Zoom, some people might think it only started when the pandemic started, but it's been around for a decade. So a lot of digital acceleration with cloud adoption and work remotely, video calls, telepresence, all of that stuff has been quite incredible. And of course, the security risks have gone ballistic as the bad guys have sought to, they know chaos is a ladder. I think that's from some Batman movie or something. But, they've taken advantage of all of that. And, last year we spoke to Aaron Bugal, the global solutions engineer at Sophos. I spoke to him earlier this week as well about other things happening to do with the making sure that all the devices you're using, some of which haven't been used, have been sitting there, they're patched, they're updated. So, but we're here to talk about, in amongst other things, the 2022 Sophos Cyber Threat Report, which I think came out actually just before the Log4j vulnerability that's now consuming tech departments. So, in addition to Log4j, I mean, what else has the cybersecurity landscape looked like in the past 12 months? And what do you see happening in the future?
What's going to happen? Look, the interesting that we picked up. So we come out with the threat report on an annual basis, and it's a really fascinating read, even if you're not highly technical. And I'll declare now that your good friend Aaron is significantly more technical than I am. So I'll give you a much higher level view than you could probably get from Aaron. He can get down into the weeds. But it is interesting, where we thought things were going to evolve to and where what we're actually dealing with today are two slightly different things. The thing that's really stood out, I think, has been ransomware in terms of what percentage that represents of total attacks. From our global sensor and Sophos Labs analysis, we picked up that about 79% of all attacks are still coming in through ransomware, which you would think that most people would be aware of and protected against and knowledgeable about and defend against. But that's that's certainly not the case. And the reason for that is because of the evolution that we've seen in the nature of attacks as well. How it's gone from straight brute force attacks to try and break down the walls, encrypt as quickly as possible,
attacks.
demand.
Yeah,
Well,
exfiltration and extortion.
Targeted. And all that stuff. But where we've seen the big changes, the evolution to a much more structured model. I mean, you think about a regular sort of enterprise organization, and you have engineers and salespeople and development and all that sort of stuff. Well, even outside of IT, any sort of structured organization. And we're now seeing within the attacking groups that there's probably 4 major groups that are behind a significant percentage of these malware attacks. I think Conti, Rebel, Ryuk, and Ragnarok are the 4 that are really standing out at this point. And then there's a lot that sit behind those guys. There's a significant amount, but those 4 are predominantly behind most of the attacks. But what we're also seeing is an evolution of the business structure that sits behind it. So we have organizations that are now developing the tools and then leasing the tools to additional organizations that will then launch the attacks. And then the fascinating thing that I find, because I'm not really a technical person, I'm more of a commercial business development strategy person, but the structure of the organizations now launching the attacks, where they have forward-thinking planners that will actually try and infiltrate the systems of the very specific targeted organizations, as you spoke about before, get in there and lie low for as long as possible, 2, 3, 4 weeks in many cases. The average that we're seeing is about 3 weeks. So they can actually learn what the organization looks like, and they can stealthily work in a sideways motion and have a look at how often backups are done, where the backups are stored, all that sort of stuff, where the interesting data sits, do the analysis of the financials. And that gives them some really interesting insights into the financial nature of the organization, what sort of cash reserves they have, the liquidity, how much money they can actually get their hands on. And that becomes important because then you launch the attack and you've encrypted their data. And then a regular organization will go, look what happened here. It's encrypted our data. Don't worry. We've got a backup. Let's go back. Let's pull up yesterday's backup. Oh, hang on a sec. That's been encrypted as well. Well, what about last week's? Oh, that seems to be encrypted as well. So your backup strategy, offsite and tape-based or whatever, is not necessarily the catch-all solution anymore. Oh, right, okay. And then what happens is the organization that is performing the attack will contact you and say, well, you might have noticed that we've encrypted your data. So if you'd like us to decrypt that for you, it's going to cost you X number of Bitcoin. Well, we were going to go to our backups, so we can't do that. But we're not thrilled with this sort of approach, so we're going to find out some of the way to go to buggery. And then the organizations will say, well, it's not just a matter of you not being able to decrypt your data. We will publish your data. And we know that you're subject to the rules, GDPR rules of privacy from a European Union perspective. So therefore, you now have the additional risk of not only being able to access your data, but we will take your data and we will put that on the web. So you better make a choice and you better make it quickly. So the structured approach they have towards not only encrypting the data, but then threatening people to make the payment is a lot more structured. The next step is, and by the way, we'll now bring our sales team in to negotiate with you. And we have seen, Aaron or Ben was able to show this stuff, but we've seen the dialogue between organizations that have been subjected to encrypted data, and then the negotiations with the ransomware companies where they will negotiate. Well, what about this? Well, how about that? How much you got? And, companies will say, we don't have that sort of money. We can't pay to have that decrypted. And the ransomware organizations will say, well, we've actually been through your financials. We know exactly how much money you have, so pay up. At the end of all of this, you need to be a lot more aware than possibly you did before. And you can't rely on a simple approach, which is, well, if you've got a backup, you're good because you just go to your backup. That's not necessarily the case because the amount of time that they will spend under the covers. The other thing is, and we always say, don't pay the ransom. Do not pay the ransom. In our analysis, only about 8% of the people that pay the ransom actually get the data back. And in many cases, it's not what you're expecting anyway. And then the decryption tools that they can provide will take a long time. It's not like, right, it's an instant decryption. It takes a significant amount of time. So what we're dealing with is a much more structured approach. You have the builders of the technology, the leasers of the technology, the executors of the technology, and then you have the teams that will negotiate to try and get your data back. So it is a lot more complex. It's a lot more structured. There's a lot more to consider.
It's a criminal enterprise that uses ransomware as a service and all the enterprise tools that a regular company would use, except they're doing it for evil.
Yeah, correct. There's a
Yeah.
there's a structured business model behind it. They have the tool builders, they have the executors, the negotiators. I'm sure they sit around on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock and have sales meetings. What do you have in commit this week? What do you think is going to close? How will we extract the dollars? Interestingly, and I'm absolutely not going to name names here, but I've spoken to more than a handful of companies around Australia, and we talked to them about the amount of data that they have and their protection, detection, response, recovery, services based set up to manage this sort of stuff, and then the value of the data, and then what their daily turnover is. And more than a handful of companies I've spoken to have Bitcoin at hand, ready, approved by their boards to pay ransom should it be required. And I say, well, how much Bitcoin do they have now? A couple of $1 million worth. I'm like, what? If they get hit with a ransomware request, and the average ransomware request is $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, it's we've got Bitcoin to cover that, because we need to be operating 24/7. If we're down mucking around trying to rebuild stuff over a week and we turn over $14 million of product per day, we'll pay the ransom to get that stuff back. Now, we hate that as a security company because it encourages, it validates the business model, all that sort of terrible stuff. We've got to be realistic that this is what we're dealing with today.
Now, ransomware obviously is one of the most important cybersecurity threats that companies, as you've just explained, still aren't getting a handle on, mainly because the ransomware guys have evolved at warp speed. But what are companies doing right? And what else in the report does it talk about with AI, with all the mobile threats? I mean, we're seeing even iPhones threatened by things like Pegasus, where they have much stronger security than Androids in general. But you've got this targeted malware, which Apple is even suing NSO. But what are some of the other things in the report we should know about? And it's a detailed 27 report. And I notice that you don't force people to, put a username or email address. You can just download it, bang.
Yeah, I hate it when companies do that. Oh, we've got some really interesting information, but you can't have it unless you tell us everything about yourself. Yeah, that doesn't work for me. Come on. Look, we really try and position ourselves. We're lucky because we get access to a lot of global data. I mean, we pull in a lot of samples on a daily basis, hundreds of thousands of samples on a daily basis. We have our Sophos Labs technicians deployed all over the world. So we get a lot of data, and obviously in the security community, we share a lot of data with others. It makes sense to give it to people. I want to make that as easy as possible. Now, you mentioned a couple of things there.
AI,
from a mobile
the
perspective,
mobile. I mean,
AI,
there's a lot of things in the report.
Yeah, and because all of those different things are threat surfaces or points of where you can have data exfiltrated or be infiltrated by malware organizations. From a mobile perspective, I mean, we've all seen this. There's the regular sort of mobile attacks. We've seen stuff on the Apple platform as well, on the App Store, with fraudulent apps being deployed, focusing on being able to compromise banking. I think the FluBot is a good example of the SMS banking Trojan that we've seen over the last 12 months.
For
and that's
Android.
detailed in the report.
Yeah.
Correct, yes. But on the Apple side, because we all love to think Apple is pure and safe and everything else, and I've got my wonderful little iPhone and I'm running this on a Mac and all that sort of stuff. But we have seen examples of fraudulent apps within the App Store as well. Now, Apple's pretty good at jumping on that stuff, but just be aware, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't mean that you let your guard down at all. AI is really interesting. We've seen AI being used by the threat actors on a global basis. And where this is getting really interesting, if you think about it, have a think about it over the last 12 months, where we've seen things like voice and video being manipulated by AI systems. And we've all seen those, slightly creepy Tom Cruise videos where Tom Cruise's face is stuck on other people. You think about, the traditional approach towards phishing from a digital perspective or from a social perspective. It'll be like, hey, this is your HR department here. I need your banking details because we're upgrading payroll, so please send it through. I'm wise to that stuff. That's a potential phishing attack. You're joking. Delete. So we got pretty good at that sort of stuff. But now start to think about how you combine things like voice and image and video with AI manipulating and turning that into a phishing attack. And your phone rings and you pick it up. Hey, this is XYZ from your payroll company. I recognize that voice. Hey, listen, we're just updating the payroll system and I don't want you to put in an email because that's a risk, but can you tell me your BSB and blah, 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 so we can just update in the system? Well, I recognize that voice and no one's trying to phish me because it's not an email. Of course, da-da-da-da-da-da. So that's what we're really sort of concerned about and got our eyes on at the moment is, social style or phishing style attacks being manipulated from an AI perspective. Now, that's the downside. On the upside from an AI perspective is we have these neural networks that we can use to actually counter a lot of these attacks. We've had elements of AI built into some of the stuff that we've been doing for a while, the synchronized security where we have endpoints talking to firewalls, the heartbeat messaging, hardening surfaces on both as they share information. So that's a fairly simple view of AI, taking different points on network and endpoints and combining it. But we're looking at how we can actually use neural networks to actually counter this sort of AI image, voice, data, that sort of fish manipulation that we've seen. So how we can counter that more effectively in a much, much bigger scale as well. So there's, it's this constant leapfrog that we've been doing in security since I started working in security back in about 1990. So plenty of work to go, plenty of work to keep us interested. The threat actors are certainly significantly smarter. But we're doing our very best to keep up with them, leapfrog them, and keep in front. We use the same sorts of tools.
And of course, this last 12 to 18 months has been the year of the supply chain attacks on Outlook, on SolarWinds, and now, of course, the Log4j Java attack, which has got companies as we speak scrambling to fix this before Christmas. It's like Y2K in one sense because they have to do all these fixes, but instead of having 3 or 4 years, they've got to do it in 3 or 4 days. Otherwise, they don't get their Christmas break.
Yeah, I mean, we used to talk from a philosophical perspective about zero-day attacks, and that's just become the common reality that we're working with today. And you're right, those supply chain attacks where you have, specific trusted suppliers that are part of your full network, that once they're compromised, if they have access internally into your network as well, it brings that threat inside. So things like ZTNA, so zero trust network access, and being able to manage applications, data points, physical hardware, and all of the data that corresponds with all of that just means you have to have, and I hate the word, I'm sorry, but you have to have a much more holistic view of security. Sorry, I hate that word, but sometimes it's just the best one to use.
Sometimes it's the paradigm shift you need to look over a new horizon and,
Yeah, all right. 1 point to you, 1 point to me.
So are there any other predictions in the report you'd like to highlight or anything else in the report we should know about besides, people typing in, I'll have the link to the report in this article, but you just type in 2022 Sophos threat report into Google and you'll find it.
Yeah, it's a fabulous document, and thank you for giving people the ability to access it. Look, we've discussed the things from a mobile perspective, supply chain. We've spoken about AI. The social profile. I think one of the interesting things as something that we've seen as a result of the lockdown was what we noticed in the first kind of 12 months of lockdown is the phishing attacks increased fairly significantly because the threat actors knew that people were in a remote environment. And it's an interesting thing because it's kind of a psychological profile as well. If you are in an office, you're working on your computer, and you're working with company data, then you're fairly tuned into the security of that environment. And, you won't generally take risks. But it's interesting, once people go home, so you take the laptop home and you connect to the home network, and that becomes the method of doing business. So I'm now sitting, at my kitchen bench or at the kitchen table, if you're lucky enough to have a home office, and you're doing that on a regular basis, your kind of security antenna drops a little because you're kind of in this home environment, so your guard comes down a little. So we saw a significant increase in the amount of phishing attacks and fairly well targeted phishing attacks as well. And then as we saw, the next evolution was a lot of people were doing home shopping. So a lot of online stuff going on because you just weren't physically going to the shops. So then we saw the fairly significant increase in the amount of mobile phishing attacks as well. The big one that we're obviously seeing coming up to Christmas is the Ozpost and other, DHL and other delivery agents phishing attacks on that nature as well.
Want to charge you $3 and pull out 300 or 3,000.
You want to release your package, then blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But what I'm thrilled to see is that most people are really tuned into that. And they're like, I just delete. And if it's serious, I know they'll probably call me. The other great thing is the way that people are actually blocking calls. So, a lot of those verbal style hacking attempts as well, push button X because you've been hit with the ATO, whatever. People are just tuned into that sort of stuff now. But that's what makes me concerned because you spoke before about that AI stuff with the combination of the video and the image and the voice. That really concerns me. I mean, I just look at that and I'm flabbergasted at the professionalism. And I think, a couple of steps beyond, I think to 2022 and 2023, and how that starts to manifest itself, I think phishing or social attacks utilizing AI, that really concerns me.
Yeah, the days of badly spelled emails that are sort of almost a dead giveaway have gone out the window. The sophistication has gone right up.
Yeah.
And
The
it's
yeah the other thing that we saw that was kind of interesting as well was where a hacking group took the Cobalt Strike technology, which was a pen test tool. It was an open source pen test tool, and actually manipulated that and actually turned it into a malware tool. And there's a bunch of organizations that have actually taken what the open source security community thought was a fairly safe pen test tool and have turned it into malware. So we're seeing just interesting manipulation of those sorts of things coming from the organizations. If I was to underline 2021 and say what happened, I would say the threat actors got one hell of a lot smarter. The attacks got a hell of a lot more complex. And if anything, we're going to see an amplification of that 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, the bad guys are always looking to exploit the weakest link. And even if they get you into that position by accident because you're frazzled with kids and things are just not normal, and they know that you're not in your normal routine, and so that's an ideal time for them to strike, and they go for the jugular. They don't they don't miss.
100%. Yeah. And it's interesting because you and I have spoken over the years about this sort of stuff. The social nature, social engineering is a big thing.
Kevin Mitnick was ahead of his time.
Yeah, right. There you go. And it used to be, the social engineering would be you'd ring up the front desk and you'd learn something, and then you'd call that using that piece of information, get a little bit more, and gradually work your way through the system. Or, in the larger offices, you'd physically tailgate someone through and grab something off the printer and they use that to da-da-da-da-da. But, as that takes less of a physical form into more of a digital form as well, it's just... it concerns me. It really does concern me. I don't lay awake at night worrying about it because I think, Sophos and other organizations are aware and developing tools to help manage it. But it worries me when I think about the general population that isn't tuned into security as a regular thing, because they're going to be reliant on tools because they don't have the situational awareness to be able to manage this sort of stuff themselves. So I'm tuned into it on a pretty regular basis, mate.
Yeah. Now, I'm friends with Peter Coronius, who's the international vice president of CIAN,
I know Peter very well.
Advisors Network. Yeah, well, Peter had his amazing pre-COVID 30th anniversary of the Internet celebrations, which was wonderful. Of course, as you know, he was the head of the Internet Industry Association in Australia, which still is amazing stuff. But now, of course, he's part of CIAN. I mean, he does a lot of events. And recently, they started up the Zero-Day Legislative Project, which explains why laws are needed to protect ethical zero-day cyber research. Because, I mean, if you investigate it and you're an ethical researcher, in some countries you can go to jail and be prosecuted. So what are your views? What are Sophos' views on this?
Yeah, look, I'm very aware of what the CIAN group are doing. You're right. In some countries, look, we found an error. Right, okay, well, you must be responsible.
Here's your new jail cell, hotel room that you can stay and do all the hacking you want.
Yeah, so I think earlier this year they had a virtual meeting or something, about 150 of them, and they were trying to work out the legal response. And obviously Peter's a very smart guy. He's got a good legal background. Terrible surfer. He thinks he's a wonderful surfer. But I think the project they're working on is actually trying to define a little bit more of the laws around that stuff, and then encourage all the members around the world how to actually lobby for having those structured laws using the different jurisdictions. And look, we're very supportive of that, obviously. As we've seen with, government organizations that discover flaws and then keep that information to themselves and then use that as a way of governments to actually infiltrate networks is never a great idea, because that stuff does get stolen. And we've seen that time and time again, and it's just not good. So our approach would be to publicize this stuff as quickly as possible and work with agencies as openly as possible, and give people incentives, not necessarily awards, but incentives or recognition for being able to help us identify that stuff. I mean, look, security is not a company. Security is a community. We can't do it. Sophos can't do this stuff on its own. Other security companies can't do it on their own. We need to share information, 100%. And that's been my personal approach ever since I started working in security back in about 1990 or so. Is I've always been of the mindset that, who are we here to benefit? It's not the company that we work for, it's our customers. And the way to do that effectively is to share information as openly as possible.
Yeah. And before I ask you a couple of questions about yourself and your own experiences, is there anything else that we should know about Sophos for all those people that are watching?
Oh, look, if you don't know Sophos already, we're a wonderful company. You should certainly use our products and come and work for us if you had the thought to do so. But no, we've been around for 37 years now, so we're one of the elder statesmen of the security industry, and we have a wonderful portfolio that covers everything from small to medium business, endpoint, network, cloud, services based, all that sort of stuff. I joined Sophos about 2.5 years ago. I've worked for a few different companies in the security space. And I just really, really enjoy it. It's a really good company with some great researchers, with some great technicians, some great developers, and a really neat product set. So it's quite surprising to people when they learn that we're actually 37 years old. Good heavens, that old. And on that basis, with the millions of endpoints and hundreds of thousands of customers around the world, that gives us a lot of great insight, which feeds into what the labs do in terms of preventative and recovery measures. And then also that's what feeds into the threat report. And the threat report is really nothing to do with Sophos, as you mentioned before. It is information for the community and for the customers of the community as well to just learn more and do better, I guess.
Yeah, and you're working for one of the good guys.
Trying
to save
I've always
the world,
worked
not
for the good guys, mate. I'm not smart enough to work for the bad guys, so there's no issues there.
Sure. Now, look, as we get towards the end of the interview, I still have a few more questions, but one question I always like to ask, can you please share a memory of your first computer?
Yeah, my very first computer, it was actually a friend's computer that actually he loaned to me and I had for an extended period, which was an Apple IIe. But my very first computer, before I worked in IT, I worked in a bank for about 18 months or 2 years. And saved up all of my precious holiday pay, and this was actually pre-super and everything else. And then when I quit, I took my roughly $2,500 that I'd saved over 2 years, and I bought Apple Macintosh 256K, which was US power supply back in those days, back in 1984, and it was just the bee's knees, mate. I loved that computer. Little 9-inch mono screen, little 256K hard. Floppy disk drive, but it was in that hard case and stuff. Fantastic. So I graduated from the Apple IIe, which is the 5.25-inch floppy, and run, all the basic programming, all that sort of stuff. Onto the Mac, and I thought, my God, look at this machine! It is fantastic. And that was the intro. Yeah, it was just amazing stuff. And I was self-taught getting into IT, so. Having the Apple IIe, you could, pop the lid off and pull the card out and put some extra chips in and all that sort of stuff. Just fascinated me. I just loved it. And that was my kind of entree into IT, a little bit of self-taught stuff. I had a friend that was working as a professional technician. So, he was at uni, but at nighttime he was doing technical work, hardware repairs. And I used to finish, the work I was doing in the bank and go and help him fix computers for free at nighttime because it was just so much fun. And from that, they said, well, you've been fixing this stuff for free for us, I guess you should pay it. So I quit my job in the bank and started doing repairs on old PC ATs and compact 386s and 286s and all that sort of stuff. A lot of fun. And I still really enjoy, just working with technology. It's just a lot of fun. And the best thing that we've seen is, when I first started doing this back in about 1982, 1983 or whatever, where it was, there'd be some kid down this road that had a computer and he was like, wow, that's the computer guy that lives in the street, to it being just, an intricate part of our lives. And we just couldn't imagine, the way that we have global communications and having a fairly nondescript computer that you might not even know running central to how you run your life is extraordinary. It's just been fantastic to see over the last 30, 35 years.
Yeah, I mean, back in those days, if you had a modem at all, you were using it to connect to a bulletin board system. One of which I was running in Canberra. I had my own bulletin board, and we had Fido mail and all the rest. And so, it's come a long, long way. I mean, these days, having a computer without an Ethernet connection is like having a DVD player or VCR with nothing to put into it.
Oh, crazy. Look, if we another time where you and I have had a couple of beers, I'll give you my my impersonation of a 2400 baud modem.
I used to whistle along all the time. I mean, I remember it fondly. And remember you got from 28.8 to 33.6 to 56, the tones changed. There was a difference. You can remember all that.
Whistling and humming and scratching and all those noises. Fantastic stuff. Oh, it takes me back.
Well, look, hopefully what I'm about to ask you, hopefully this doesn't generate any bad memories, but what's your first memory or first experience with viruses, malware, and ransomware?
Oh, gosh. So, I first started I worked in a distributor. So, and one of the products that we distributed was semantic antivirus for the Macintosh, SAM. So if you ran a Mac back then, you might remember that. And it was on the days where you had hexadecimal codes for virus detection. So you used to have to key in all the hexadecimal codes. So I was the distributor of semantic antivirus for the Macintosh, which then became Norton Antivirus, which was obviously one of the biggest things in the world. I was responsible for communicating to the customer base the hexadecimal codes that you'd have to key in for that sort of stuff. So the big things back then, there was I Love You and Michelangelo and all that sort of stuff. And that was fascinating because that was at the time where these were phenomenal things like, gosh, because more and more people are getting computers and there's these viruses and gosh, they can shut down your computer and stuff. So from a media perspective, that was really big news. So it was a lot of, big responsibility, but a lot of fun communicating to people about, how to manage that stuff. Like number one, don't panic. Number two, patch. Ensure that you got antivirus installed. Don't click on weird attachments. It was always the basic stuff, 3 or 4 or 5 different things. A lot of those things haven't changed too much over the last 30, 35 years, to be honest. It's still the same basic things to reduce the risk. But it's a lot of fun. I mean, the security industry is a hell of a lot of responsibility, and there is, trillions and trillions of dollars of assets at risk. And it's not, being overly dramatic to say this stuff impacts people's lives. But it's incredibly satisfying knowing that we're performing a service like we're performing, to be honest.
And so was that move into Symantec antivirus for Mac at that distributor, was that effectively your entree into the world of cybersecurity?
That was it. So from that came a job, moved to America back in the mid-90s and actually got a job with Symantec over in the US and worked with them over there for 2 or 3 years and then came back and ran their local operation. And from that, that was at a time where .com was taking off, so security relating to .com was pretty critically important as people were starting to move financial transactions online a lot more, and online banking and online procurement of consumer goods and all that sort of stuff. And that grew into, what's really become the most enjoyable part of my time in the IT industry. I've worked for digital identity and networking and virtualization companies and all that sort of stuff. But my real love, to be honest, Alex, is working with security. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. So how do you see Sophos evolving over the next 12 months? And then secondly, how do you think the security landscape might look in the 2030s, when we're all walking around in the metaverse with AR glasses in front of our eyes? And also I like to imagine that by then, we might have, maybe it's closer to the 2040s, but we might have brain chips that the hackers will try and, put you into a digital coma by switching the brain chip off or holding it to ransom. The possibilities are crazy of the sort of things that Sophos and others will have to get involved with. We'll have to include biomedical technology protection as well.
Yeah. Look, 100%. And I used to think that would be, the evolution of technology would be all about implants. But if you think about it, not necessarily. The harmonization of the biological with the digital means that implants might not actually be a part of that.
That might be wireless. Somehow.
Well, 100%, precisely. So from a biomedical perspective and connection perspective, it could completely be wireless. And then as you talk about the metaverse and you start to think about, the AI component of metaverse, as we talked about before, the manifestation of malicious code into an AI format within the metaverse is something that we need to be thinking about now. As you start to develop more of that digital online world that's not through a keyboard, but it's through a manifestation of yourself as an avatar in a metaverse, that's a serious thing we've got to think about, because you will have interactions and you would hope that those interactions were safe and secure. And it's our job to be able to ensure that that's definitely the case.
That's right. How do you know that's it? How do you know the person you're speaking to in the metaverse is that person? We've seen that movie Surrogates with Bruce Willis, where people were at home sitting in their chair and activating these robots, and anybody could have been activating them. So how do you avoid being catfished, or when how do you identify that the person you're speaking to really is them? That's kind of authentication. That's the thing.
You're 100%. So that authentication, and that's what I did with that digital identity stuff that I was working with before I joined Sophos. A lot of that was around digital identity authentication, governance, that sort of stuff. But you're right. If you postulate out, look beyond the mid-2020s, where this stuff will start to manifest itself, and think, wow, now to the future, 2035, 2040 or whatever, I am hoping that I'm sitting on a beach with a beer in my hand and not having to worry about this stuff too much, that my grandchildren will be looking after it for both you and me. It's extraordinary when you think about it. Think about where we were 20 years ago, and we're just thinking, well, add another 20 years to that. how things have evolved in that short period of time.
Yeah.
You're quite right. It'll be the the bionic combination of the digital that we're dealing with today. But I think in a non-invasive biological perspective is how it'll be manifesting itself, and in real time, and with much higher level of computing powers. So the ability to manifest malware into an avatar sort of format, I think, will be something that we'll significantly have to think about.
Yeah. Now, my second last question is to simply ask if you could please share some of the best advice you've received in life to help you get where you are today.
It's hard to come up with something that doesn't sound trite, but it's interesting. In my life, I've done a lot of presentations, to big and small rooms. I've done a lot of, strategy sessions and stakeholder sessions, conversations with, financial analyst communities, all that sort of stuff. And the thing that's really stuck with me is, honestly, you just got to be yourself in those situations. Don't try and turn yourself into something you think other people will be impressed by. If they're not impressed by who you are as an individual, then don't waste your time, to be honest. So for good or for worse, what you got today is a pretty good indication about what, who I am in my private life as well. And I actually kind of coach a lot of people in my organization around, presenting. And I can tell when they're trying too hard. And I'm like, just relax, X, Y, Z. You're a really good person. Just let that shine through.
Yeah. Well,
so to everybody watching, be yourself. It's the best person you could ever hope to be.
Absolutely. And when you're the MD of an organization, you take on, as part of your leadership role, it's a lot of mentorship to, to help all the people in the organization grow and advance their careers. So, it's a good part of it's a good time of life.
It is. It's being honest with you, one of the most satisfying things that I can do in my organization is give people the ability to develop their skills internally, and as much as possible promote people internally. At Sophos, we are big fans of internal promotions. As much as possible, we'll help people identify career tracks, and then we'll help them identify what it is they want to do, and then we'll help them build the skills. More often than not, when we are hiring people for more senior roles, we'll bring people up internally that don't necessarily have the skills, but we'll help them build the skills internally. Yeah, that's right. It's a great thing you can do in an organization, is just give people a little bit of hope that there's opportunities for them internally as much as possible.
So, John, what is your final message to iTWire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
Oh my God, my final message to all of the iTWire viewers and readers and everybody else is, you've made it through 2021. Well done, because it was a worse year than we thought it was going to be off the back of last year. So congratulations to all of you. If you haven't finished work yet by the time you view this, I hope you finish up soon and you just enjoy some time with yourself or with your family. Just relax, clear your head. We're going to be back into this sort of environment again next year. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot easier than what we saw this year. So make sure your headspace is in the right order, as well as your physical space and your work head. Just relax, gather your thoughts. Let's ease into it and do it well.
And happy and prosperous 2022 to us all.
Indeed.
Well, John Donovan, Managing Director, Australia New Zealand at Sophos, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us more about the company and the 2022 Sophos Threat Report. And I hope we can talk again in the future.
Alex, thank you so much. It was great spending the afternoon with you, and have a wonderful Christmas and New Year as well.
And to you and your family, and to everyone watching as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.